Hello, thank you everyone for joining us tonight. We are talking with Kirsten Lee Hill, as she is a doctor of data collection and data science. Kirsten, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Would you like to give us a little bit of your background and how you got into data collecting?
Yeah, absolutely. So, my background, I'm like classically trained in education. I have a PhD in education and I studied success in schools, like how you measure success in schools. And I had the opportunity to do a lot of work with data collection, survey data in particular, but also like evaluation rubrics and those types of things. And when I graduated, I decided that academia was not the best fit for me, which is fine. And that I really wanted to make research so much more like accessible and meaningful to people because I feel like it's so powerful and it's something that we're inundated with every day. Like people are sharing stats and being like, this study shows this, and now research shows this, and it's everywhere, but it's not always expressed in a way that makes sense to someone who like hasn't studied research. And you even look
Mhm.
at how many research articles are like locked away behind paywalls. Like it's just not accessible or available. And at the same time, it's something that we consume a lot. And then also for people who work with different organizations and companies or for themselves, I actually think it's something that we do a lot. Like anytime we ask someone a question to try to get information, I'm like, "Hi, that's research, right?" And so
Mhm.
I just became really passionate about how to demystify that process and make it something that everyone can like learn to do more critically, right? And be like, okay, when I'm asking questions, like I should think about these things. And when I'm reading a report or a news article, I should think about these things so that we can all just like get better information and make like much more informed decisions.
I think it's great. I can totally see your passion for the topic, which brings me into the topic and makes me interested and engaged. So it's quite lovely. I love it. What are a few tips that you would give to anyone looking at data, how to evaluate that in a critical mindset? How do you turn on that critical mindset?
Yeah. So I think a lot about something that like I learned in elementary school, but it's like the 5 W's, like who, what, when,
Mhm.
where, why. So anytime I see a fact, it's like first I want to know like who did they get this information from, right? Because I want to know like is it from people like who are my age so it's relevant to me, or is it from people like in my
Mhm.
profession or a different like that's really important context. So I'm like, okay, like who is this from? Like what kind of information is it? Like if everyone would just like have to share the questions they'd ask, that would be brilliant, but like they probably won't. But it's like, was it a survey, was it an interview? Like just kind of understanding more like where the heck did this number come from, like
Mhm.
understanding that I think is really important. Where in this global society, like a lot of times strangely, like I'll read news articles and I'm like, I actually don't even know what country this data came from, right? Like you go
Um,
through things and I'm like, oh, like it's actually like very different, like here and like Canada or like India
mm,
or Africa or Australia. And it's like, so where did the data come from? Is it a global data set? Like understanding like geographically where and when it came from. Because one, like publishing can be delayed. So sometimes by the time
mhm.
something's published, it's already been many years, but also people have a bad habit of like reporting things like it's happening now when it really happened like in the 80s. And I honest to God, like there was an article that like in this, I don't know, a couple months ago about certain careers that were more deadly. And it was based on a data set from the 80s. And I'm like, I just like I don't even want to read that today. Like or like present it as like in the 80s, this was like
Mhm.
dangerous. It's just like that's such important context. And then and the last W, like the why, I think the motivation is really important. Like knowing like
Mhm.
why are people asking these questions? Like what are they exactly like doing with this information? Because
Mhm.
like it or not, like we all have like biases and perspectives that we bring to things. So having a better understanding of like who funded this, right? Like that changes
Mhm.
how I interpret what's coming across. And so I think that that's like I like the 5 W's because it's like it's easy to remember the 5 W's and it's like okay, just like run through that And if you can't find some of them, to me, that's like immediate skepticism, because I'm like, well, why aren't they telling me like what year this information came from? Or like, why don't I know anything about like how old people were who took this survey? Like that worries, I think like how different, I'm a millennial. I think about like how different Gen Z is. And I'm like, I actually want, like, did Gen Z take this survey, or was it like, it's like, I want to know, like, what are we talking about?
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because not often are we told all the information, right? We're not told who paid for the survey. We're not told where the information is going to go if we're taking a survey. It just goes into a void, and we don't know what happens with that information. So what do you tell clients up front to try to get them into that mindset of collecting clean data, and why they need to be transparent, I guess, in their collection?
Yeah, I think it really starts with helping people to get super clear on like what actually they want or like need to know. And it's like just getting so specific. And I think it's helpful to think in terms of what you want to be able to say. Because we're like, oh, we want to know all these things. It's like, okay, but like, what are the 5 sentences ideally you want to be able to say, like based on this data collection, and being really clear? Like, we want to report how many people like thought this thing was useful, or like how many people are going to purchase this again, like whatever it is. Like, I think being really clear, like, this is what we want to be able to say, not from the sense that you can't control whether people respond like positively or negatively, but like you want to know, like, these are the key points we want to hit home. I think that that's super helpful right from the start. And being really clear also about their motivation behind it. It's like, why do you need this information? And like, how can you explain that to other people so that they know like why this is important, and like what are you doing to protect them and giving you this information? Like, how are you going to use it? And really giving people all of the tools so that they feel like, yes, I feel comfortable sharing this information. I know where it's going. I think this is important. And like really generating that buy-in up front, I think, is so critical, and something that you have to think about when you're doing the design. Because like, one, you don't want to ask things that you're like not willing to like make changes on, right? But two, you also want to make it so clear from the beginning, like, hey, Kirsten, like, I'm asking you for this information because I want to do this with you. And like, when I share it, I'm going to put your name all over it, which like, hopefully you're not, but like, to tell people, like, if you're going to use my name with it, tell me. Or like, if it's going to be a secret, tell me it's a secret. But I think just being really clear about thinking the data collection as like it's a type of relationship. Like you're having a relationship with these people, you're having this exchange of information. So really like showing them the respect and like emphasizing that like you value them, and so like you're being transparent.
Yeah, I think that's great. And in terms of like that respect, and I would link it almost to an informed consent process, right? You're telling the people before they take the survey what you're going to use. If it's anonymous, if your name's going to be linked to it, they would need to know those things.
100%. Absolutely. And I think in making that in like such clear language, right? Like, I think you see some like informed consent things that are so long. I'm like, no one's reading that. People probably don't understand what it says. So it's just like being very clear. I know, like, I always think about like, how would you ask like a 3rd grader if you have their informed consent? And like, just ask all adults as if they were like a 3rd grader. Like, we just need to really be like, this is what we're using it for. I always put, like, in my surveys, I put like, this will be confidential, which means like, I'll know how you responded, but no one else will. And I just like define it, which it seems, I don't know, like I have colleagues who are like, that's like overkill. Like, you don't need to do that. And it's like, I would rather have someone be armed with like too much information to make a decision than not enough.
Yeah, I think that's great. And, you bring so much light to a lot of these topics that I don't think people really consider when they're creating a survey, and they don't consider all of the thought and expertise that has to go into creating something to make it scientifically viable. It's, I can ask just a lot of questions, but that doesn't mean that they're scientifically like relevant to the topic even that I'm asking about. So I really appreciate your time in highlighting how this expertise can help in clinical or in other fields. I think it's great.
Yeah.
And if you'd like to share with us your socials, Kirsten, we can
Yeah.
link those in the comment section for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. So on Clubhouse and LinkedIn and Facebook, I'm at Kirsten Lee Hill. And then on Instagram, it's at KLH Consulting. It's the only one that's different.
Okay, great. And we do have a Clubhouse interview that you can. I will link in the comments as well that others can rewatch on replay if they are interested, because you go into more in depth into a lot of these topics. And it was, we're right at 10 minutes. So I really appreciate your time, Kirsten. And it was just lovely chatting. Like I said, your passion for data is just so contagious. I love it.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank
Thank you.
you.